2025, Mr. James Edwards.
There's no following up that introduction. That is the best introduction I've ever heard anyone give anybody, ever. I love John. John is one of the coolest people I've met through my quarter of a century now of doing this, and we had such a good time when I was up here last time.
Forgot to mention, it was 2016.
2016, I'll talk about that. But he is a treasure. This forum is a treasure. His TV show, when I heard about his TV show, I went and found every clip I could find of it on YouTube, and just the comedy, but the seriousness and the truth, the way he blends those in, I mean, that's a real talent. Y'all got a real treasure here with you in Michigan. Let's give a round of applause to our host, John Mangopoulos. I actually had a nightmare a couple of weeks ago. This is a true story, that I got up here for this particular event and had no notes, and I didn't realize it until like this moment, but thankfully that didn't happen. I'll give you a little bit of, in fact, I better start my timer so I'll make sure I don't go over. Sometimes I do that. Let me get the timer going here on clock. In addition to a homophobe, I'm a technophobe too, so I don't do very good with this stuff, but there it is, so the timer's going. A little bit about my background. I got my start earnestly quarter of a century ago, hard to believe. The fall of '99 going into the year 2000, there was a guy running for president that I wanted to, at least meet, if not try to help support or just do whatever I could, volunteer. And I saw that this particular candidate was going to be visiting Nashville, which is just right down the road from me. By the way, it's still chilly up in pure Michigan. Spring has already sprung in the Confederacy where I'm from. But he was going to be appearing at the Hermitage, so said his website. And it was a bitterly cold day, a lot colder than it was when I got out of the car last night, and was shocked to find that it's still so cold up here. I mean, it was about 20 degrees. And I got up to the Hermitage that morning, and there was nobody there. There wasn't a car anywhere. It was so cold that just nobody showed up to anything. So I went up to the ticket counter. I said, I'm here to, there's supposed to be a candidate event here today. I said, no, there's nothing on the schedule. There's nothing booked today for any special event. I was like, wow, this was the year 2000, so I couldn't get on my phone because you couldn't get on the internet on your phone back then. And I said, well, I could have sworn I saw something on the website. So I milled around a little bit, and nobody's there. And I said, well, they said there's no event here. I guess I saw it wrong. And I was about to leave. And this is, the Hermitage is where Andrew Jackson, that's his home and presidential library where he's buried. So I'm about to leave, and I see this, not an Escalade. What did the Secret Service drive in? Suburban. It was a Suburban that drove up. I could see two people in the car. A driver, and then who I hoped would be the guy that I was coming to see. They pull up right to the edge of the driveway there at the main entrance, and out steps the candidate. Out steps Pat Buchanan. And so I'm just standing there. I'm 19. I'm 19, and I'm standing there, just gobsmacked. And I said, Mr. Buchanan, I thought there was supposed to be an event here for you. I showed up for it, but they said there's not an event. And he just said, well, actually, that was part of my private itinerary. It wasn't supposed to be posted on the website. I think that was only up there for a few minutes before they pulled it. Now, he was going to be there for a fundraising event that night, which I had signed up for. But then I saw this little add-on thing, so I wanted to go to that. I said, well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to, intrude on your personal visit here. I'll see you at the fundraiser tonight. He said, no, why don't you just come on and take the tour with me? And so for the next couple of hours, it was me and Pat Buchanan and his driver and the curator of the Hermitage going all around the Hermitage, just a private tour. And that was a day that absolutely and positively changed my life. And so I signed up, of course, for the campaign after that and became a volunteer, and over the course from January through November had the opportunity to work myself up the ranks, I guess. I started as just a volunteer doing menial things, and then they asked me to be a district captain and then the treasurer of the campaign. 19 years old in Tennessee, and then had the opportunity to go out to Long Beach, California for the Reform Party nominating convention. And then by the end of that campaign, I was actually doing media appearances as a spokesman for local TV and radio and newspapers, things that were too small for his attention, but something that they needed people on the ground for the local media to do. And I actually And I believe it was September of that year, there was a local TV show that had the chairman of the Republican Party, the chairman of the Democratic Party of Tennessee, or Shelby County, I should say. It was a local show, and which is Memphis. And then me, and because the Reform Party was still getting
Traction.
well, and matching funds from the federal government as a result of Ross Perot's standing. So they were included in some things, but not other things, like the presidential debate. But that particular show had a Reform Party representative, and they sent me. And I can't think of a better comparison except to say I know what those boys defending Berlin in 1945 against the Red Army must have felt like, me going up against the chairman of the Republican and Democratic parties of Tennessee in that debate. I still have the VHS in the attic, and I'll never watch it again, I can tell you. But that year led me to, I had such a wonderful time with those people. Those people were some of the greatest people still to this day that I've ever met, the people that I met who were working on that campaign. A lot of them have been gathered into their fathers by now, but I wanted to keep that band together, so I said, if I ran for the State House of Representatives in 2002, could we kind of keep the local team and the regional team that was working for Pat? Would y'all support me in a run? And they did. And we ran, and I was, so full of what and vinegar that I ran as a independent, trying to, still stick it to the duopoly, and that probably in hindsight wasn't the best way to go forward when you were going up against the Speaker of the House and another guy in a three-way race. But we got nearly 20% as an independent candidate in a three-way race, including going up against the incumbent Republican Speaker of the House. And I think they reported at that time that was the highest percentage of the vote, because most independents just put their name on the ballot and they don't run. We actually ran to win. We knocked on every door in that district. And we had a campaign headquarters yard. I mean, the whole thing. It was a professional campaign to the extent it could be professional with the amount of money we had to work with. But we didn't win, of course, but it did raise my profile in the local community just enough to where when a talk radio station that was reformatting from gospel to conservative political talk, they were looking for shows and local shows. And I got a call. They said, "Were you that guy that ran for the state legislature?" "Yep." "Well, we're reformatting. Would you like to have your own radio show?" And that we went on the air for the first time in the fall of 2004. And I've been there ever since. That's 21 years and counting on the radio as I stand here today. And it's been a wonderfully tumultuous 2 decades. I can tell you that. The last time that I spoke here was right before the 2016 election. So that was the October gathering of this forum. And I think it was about 2 weeks before the election. And I had interviewed Donald Trump Jr. earlier that year, and the media was absolutely apoplectic about that interview having taken place, because we're on the hate watch list, we're on all these things. And they continued to write about it all throughout the year. The New York Times, and I'm talking about everybody, Washington Post, they may still be writing articles about it. Sometimes they do that. Just because there hasn't been any updates on something in a number of years doesn't mean it's not still breaking news. The Emmett Till story is another example of this phenomenon. But one thing interesting about Michigan, I'll tell you a quick Michigan story before we get to reasons for optimism, is that the most outrageous example of media doing what media does came from the Detroit News. Now, I had been used to, for decades now, but a decade prior to 2016, I'd been used to being called a racist and a Nazi and an anti-Semite and all the things John said in the media. That's protected free speech. You can call people things. But when an enterprising reporter for the Detroit News wrote in an article covering my interview with Donald Trump Jr. that I was the leader of the Ku Klux Klan, I said, at some point, even if you're sort of a public figure, at some point, libel, there is a such thing as libel, right? Mm-hmm. So luckily for me, and for all of us, if you know him, he is sometimes a participant in this forum. He has spoken here and he has attended these meetings before. I knew an incredible lawyer who was a friend of mine in Michigan by the name of Kyle Bristow. And I called Kyle. Actually, I saw Kyle at an event in Dallas that I was speaking at that year. And I said, "Kyle, I'm so glad I didn't even know he was going to be there. I said, Kyle, I'm so glad you're here. Let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you about this article. I said, he said, James, he goes, I can't tell you to pursue this, but you have a slam dunk case. He said, that actually is the textbook legal definition of what constitutes, what rises to the level of libel, is to allege without any proof that someone is a member of the Ku Klux Klan, much less the leader of the Ku Klux Klan. He said, if you want me to take this case, I'd be happy to take it. And I said, let's do it. And older people in the call said, well, you're not going to win. These courts are criminally corrupt. No, this is black and white. This is, and he showed me the restatement of torts, which is basically the legal Bible. This is the textbook definition of libel. So we filed a lawsuit, very rare lawsuit in which one of our guys are the plaintiffs and rather than the defendant, but we filed a lawsuit against the Detroit News, and we just got blown out of the lower court. It just got completely dismissed. We didn't even get to go to court. She just dismissed it out of hand, said, no, you have no case here. Surely you jest, this is the law. This is actually the textbook definition of libel. So we appealed to the Michigan Court of Appeals, and it was a it was a panel of 3 judges, 2 black judges and a Jewish judge. And they actually put forth a published opinion. And I read this, I actually have had it pulled up, you can look it up. It was James Edwards versus the Detroit News, and Kyle sent it to me. It came in on Halloween 2017, so we filed the lawsuit in the spring of 16. The ruling from the Court of Appeals came out on Halloween Day 2017, and Kyle sent it to me, said it's in. I said, well, what do they say? He goes, just read it. So I was expecting good news. I was like, well, he would just, I expect to lose, of course, but. So I read the opening paragraph, and I said, we won. It said, the plaintiff is correct that this does rise to meet the standard of the legal definition of libel. And then it goes on a little bit, and then in their conclusion, this panel of judges said, but we must also be mindful of Aesop's lesson that a man should be judged by the company he keeps. Therefore, we rule in favor of the defendant, case dismissed. And so they went to my radio show and they found people that they disagree with and people who have politically incorrect opinions. And they said, well, if he interviews these people, therefore, he must obviously be the leader of the Ku Klux Klan, I guess. So I don't know. But anyway, and I think the people that they cited in that particular ruling was Sam Dixon, who's an attorney in Atlanta. He had actually defended a member of the Klan in the 70s, and I guess that was the most real connection they could find. But anyway, that's okay. That's what we're up against. We know what we're up against. It didn't bother the Trumps too much. I had the opportunity to go. I was actually in the arena in Cleveland when he received the Republican nomination that year, and then had press credentials to the inauguration. I was about 50 feet away from Trump when he was sworn in 2016. They gave me a +1, and I took Jared Taylor from American Renaissance, if anybody knows him. But I said with confidence in 2016 that Donald Trump was going to be elected president of the United States that year. And in the spring of 16, not a lot of people believed that would even be possible, even the people who wanted it to be true. But the message that I'm going to share with you today is a message that I'm equally sure about. 2016, the last time I was here, that was less than a decade ago. But we're a world away from where we were back then. And in many respects, even if inadvertently, it is because of Donald Trump that all of these changes, these what I believe to be positive changes, have occurred. And they're going to present us with opportunities that we're enjoying now, but even more will come that previously did not exist. Now, let me also assure you that before I continue, any youthful naivete that I may have had going back to that day at the Hermitage 20-something years ago, almost 25 years ago. 25, it's been over 25 now. That was January of 2000. All that youthful naivete has been long since zapped. I have been attacked by, at one point or another in my career, every media outlet in the country, an incessant drumbeat of ridicule and slander and condemnation. I have an unblemished record of setbacks and defeats. I've been denounced by name by the United States Congress. I've been banned by every social media platform and credit card processing company in the universe. But I've been right about a lot of things. I've been right about a lot of things, and I'm still brimming with zeal because I know that our cause is just. That's number one. And I think that things are going to turn around for us. Not just presently, in this present moment, because we've got the guy in the White House that we wanted over Kamala Harris, but I mean fundamentally and civilizationally speaking, I think things do change. Mark Weber is a friend of mine with the Institute for Historical Review. He gave a speech last year, and he just made a very simple but profound remark in this speech. Things won't always be this way. And I believe that. Things won't always be the way they've been for as long as we've been alive. When I first got my start in activism and advocacy, like all young lads, I thought the only reason we hadn't won yet is because I hadn't yet arrived on the scene, that one person could single-handedly turn this rudder. And of course, it didn't take me long to figure out that this nut is going to be a lot more difficult to crack than that. And I quickly dispensed with that sort of thinking that one has in his youth and adopted the mindset that I'm going to serve as the faithful and happy shepherd of whatever flock that God gives me, with the radio program or with any outreach opportunities like John has so graciously given me today. And that's what we would do until we're called home. But I'm beginning to think now, and I've thought for a few years now, that we actually have a puncher's chance of witnessing something amazing in our own lifetimes and in the very near term. This corrupt and gluttonous empire that we live under is not going to stand the test of time. Now, we know that because no empire ever has. And the United States is not going to be an exception to that. That much I can tell you. And it is unfortunate for all of us in this room that we had to have lived through this nadir of the American experiment. We've spent a lifetime watching things get progressively worse. And whenever you hear the word progress being used by a liberal, what that means is something's getting progressively worse. And we've watched for years as society has circled down the drain with no end in sight, but then inexplicably, and within the past couple of years especially, whites of middle-class America started to show a pulse again. Who knew? And make no mistake about it, the GOP base, the average Trump voter, is beginning to show signs of an emerging consciousness that had been long since dormant. And there are mountains of statistical and anecdotal evidence to prove my point on this. I'll just give you one. I went from, not much more than a decade ago being denounced by the United States Congress, on the record, on television. I've got an event coming up that I'm hosting. It's an event for my radio program that's going to have 2 congressmen as speakers, a senator, a member of parliament from Europe, and Ron Paul's old campaign manager, Lou Moore. And Lou sent some books up here, some signed books, and John's got those back there. He's become a good friend of mine. I got a letter in the mail from Lou, and he had been a donor, but I didn't recognize the name. And he had been a donor to the radio program for years. And he sent a letter with one contribution. He just said, hey, I just wanted to introduce myself. I recognized his name as the name on the list, but I didn't, the name Lou Moore didn't immediately resonate. And he said, I just wanted you to know I was Ron Paul's campaign manager when he ran for president. And I've just, listened to your show for a long time. He said, if you wanted to give a call sometime, I'd love to hear from you. I was like, but I like to give him a call. I called immediately. I said, I can't believe you're a listener of the audience. You're a member of the audience. And anyway, that was just last year. And he and I have just become great friends, and he is just a wonderful guy. So all of this, I think, just goes to show, well, Lou was always a true believer. I mean, Lou is a solid, rock-solid guy. He'd be a great speaker at this forum, by the way. And so would some of these other congressmen that I'm working with. There's actually a congressman who, I talked to him yesterday, and I told him about this event. He said, where in Michigan? Oh, I was born in Lansing. But he's, down in the South now. So things are moving in our direction, and these are great people. These are great people. But let's just take a trip back with me, if you would, for a second. I thought about giving my whole talk today on just some of the great things that have happened since Trump's inauguration. All of the great things that we're seeing coming out of Washington right now, or at least of this administration. But y'all can read the news as well as I can, and so I'm sure y'all are probably pretty up to date on some of the things that Trump is doing. And it's important, and it should be reiterated, but we'll just take for granted that everybody knows Trump's doing a pretty good job, all things considered. And so rather than focus on that, I just wanted to look at this thing in widescreen, look at a big picture. So let's take a trip now with regards to reasons for optimism back to the late 2000s, around 2010. Right around the time people like me and Peter Brimelow and some of these other people were making our final appearances as guests on CNN and Fox News and C-SPAN and outlets like that. Yeah, they did used to have us on. They talk about us now, but not to us, and there is a difference. But John is right. But my first time on CNN was in 2007. And they did. It was a round-trip limousine service to and from the airport. They flew me from Memphis to New York City, and I was on for an hour with Jesse Lee Peterson. Jesse was my partner in that, and he's been a speaker at this forum, and he is a great guy. But Jesse and I were on one side of the table, and then there were two other black folks on the other side. But Jesse and I were there to argue for segregation, and the other two were against it. It was a whole hour on self-segregation is what it was, self-segregation. And but they don't do that anymore. They don't do that anymore. But if you look at the state of so-called conservatism at that time, just 2010, not that long ago, you saw a lot of disaffected, what would become the Trump voters, a lot of disaffected white voters being spoken for by people like Glenn Beck. And thankfully, those days are gone. The days of the Tea Party. Not that the people that were in the Tea Parties were bad; they were good people, but they just didn't have good leadership. People like Glenn Beck stepping in to sort of harness that energy. And even Beck has gotten a little more bold now. I mean, courage is contagious. Once people make it, when you're the first over the wall, you take a lot of heavy damage while other people are getting into position. And so now even Glenn Beck sounds sensible on some things. But anyway. Glenn Beck did a big rally in Washington around at the height of the Tea Party days. It was at the Lincoln Memorial. And he was standing there on a certain step at the Lincoln Memorial, and there was, I don't know how many thousands of people, just a sea of Tea Party people. I don't know if any of y'all remember this, but he took a step down from where he was, and he said, I don't deserve to stand on this step. I'm going to address you from this step. This is the step where our great hero Martin Luther King stood, and we're not worthy of that. Look, let me tell you folks, you can't win with people like that. You can't win with people like that. That is not my kind of conservative, and that is not my kind of Christian. So it was people like that that led me at that time to write the book that John mentioned, Racism, SCHMACISM, How Liberals Use the R Word, and I was all out of these. I always keep them in stock, but I just run out, and John said, you're bringing the book, right? And I said, well, I'll bring the other one. No, bring this one. Well, I rushed to the printer. I said, I got to have this. I got to go to Michigan. John Langopoulos needs some copies of this. So they did a rush job, and it's back there. So, it was written in 2010, so some of the examples that I'm drawing from are dated to that time, but the message is evergreen. I mean, this whole scam about everybody's a racist if you say something you disagree with, or if you just observe truths about crime and society. Well, you got to unlock that socio-political nuclear bomb before you're ever going to build a movement that wins. And so we tried to, for what I could do, I tried to help out with that back when I wrote this book 15 years ago. That word just doesn't mean what people think it means, and they spew out these accusations incessantly. They want to keep you on the defensive, spinning your wheels. As long as you're debating somebody whether you are or are not a racist, you're not actually going to be accomplishing anything, which is, of course, exactly what they want. And I had the, speaking of that, we have interviewed so many incredible people on the show, not just the kind of people that, again, would address this crowd, masculine conservatives, but celebrities and historical figures. I mean, my hero, Pat Buchanan, came on the show several times. I had to quit asking Pat to come on the show because he would always say yes, and every time he would come on, they would just attack him incessantly, and I hated to see that. But we've interviewed some really interesting people. I interviewed the man who arrested Rosa Parks. And he wrote a book called Another View of the Civil Rights Movement. It's just fascinating first-person eyewitness testimony from the perspective of the much maligned and beleaguered, Alabama law enforcement. He was a great guy, a great guy. These people didn't hate or whatever. They were trying to keep a little law. We've had some great interviews like that. But people get it now. I think more and more people get it now, certainly than ever before, and largely because of Trump. Trump, ever since he descended that golden escalator to announce his first campaign, hard to believe. I mean, this is the age of Trump. 3 runs for president, 3 wins really, but 2 3 wins, 2 that counted. And every day since he first announced, he's been denounced as a racist, a bigot, white supremacist, fascist, every day. And I think that has numbed people to the reality of what these terms are really being used for. And the left has just overplayed it so much. Trump could cure cancer or walk on water, and the headline would be, Trump's a racist. And people are increasingly beginning to understand that reality now. The late Bob Whitaker, he was a Reagan administration appointee. Bob Whitaker was a friend of mine. He was one of the first ones to really just start talking about this in a way that caught on publicly. He's been dead a long time now. But he's right, these people that use the word racist, they're not anti-racist. They're anti-white. And we've come a long way on that front in a short amount of time. And this 2004 election, I think, was the death knell of the establishment media. All of their power, all of that power in full array to elect Kamala Harris, and Trump just steamrolled her. And alternative media has taken center stage. There's just such a proliferation of talent and live streams and alternative online networks. It has supplanted the whatever you want to call it, the legacy media, the mainstream media, the establishment media, the lying media. It's gone. So where are we now? Now, to answer that, I'm going to give you some statistics and some data to help gird your loins. And so here was one headline. 73% of Trump voters think Democrats are trying to replace white people with immigrants and people of color who share their political views. Shock, new poll shows. Well, I don't know what's so shocking about it, but 73%, that's numbers you can win with. 73% of tens of millions of people beginning to say things that no conservative would have touched 10 years ago. And people are a lot less naive about these things in this post-George Floyd, Joe Biden America. Blake Masters, for example, he was one that ran a very competitive race. Maybe he won it, who knows, but they didn't give it to him. But he was very close to winning a Senate seat in Nevada in 2022. And, you don't hear this kind of language, or at least you didn't, coming from the Republican candidate for United States Senate in a swing state. But they asked him about gun violence, and he said, well, most of it is black people, frankly. It's a candidate for Senate in Blake Masters in Nevada in 2022, according to a headline at the time. So people are becoming more bold in speaking out about these things. I was in Dallas 2 weeks ago for a talk, and it was just a packed house of young people. Young people. I think the average age of that particular group was late 20s. And it was standing room only, and that was 2 weeks ago. And if you look at some of these polls coming out, I think they're calling it Generation Z now. I don't know where they're going to go after that. But the current generation of young people that are beginning to reach voting age or just now voting age are much more further to the right than the generation immediately after them and 2 generations after them. So the youth is actually coming back in verifiable ways. But this is the thing about telling the truth. Once people start to do it, other people start to do it, and it becomes fashionable again. It can be contagious like that. Tulsi Gabbard, who was the last honest Democrat or former Democrat, as it were, she had added the term anti-white to her vocabulary as late as a couple of years ago. I actually ran into her at an event, was it last summer, I think? Last summer? Yeah, last summer. And I talked to her in the hall. I said, I just wanted to tell you thank you for bringing up and speaking publicly about anti-white discrimination. And she said it's an important issue. and I'm going to continue to do that. And now she's what? She's the director of national intelligence now under Trump? Now how about these appointments? I mean, he's learned a lot since 2016 with these appointments this time around. RFK and just a whole lot. Pretty incredible. But people are rapidly catching up to the positions that this forum has held for longer than I've been on the radio. Going almost a quarter of a century now itself with what John's doing here. But to what extent are they catching up? Well, again, in my estimation, reasons for optimism, the ground is shifting as we speak, and it's observable in real time. It's happening so fast. We're beginning to now see millions of Trump voters believe that having a strong leader is more important than protecting our democracy, and that's with a capital D, as the Washington Post now writes it. But according to a recent Yahoo News YouGov poll, red state Trump voters are now more likely to say that they would be better than worse off if their state seceded, which is going to be a topic that we're going to address in just a moment. But it's not just here, stateside, that we are seeing these stirrings. Hungary's leader, Viktor Orban, bashed Western Europeans for, quote, mixing with non-Europeans, end quote, and said that Hungarians do not want to become mixed race. That's a direct quote from not a failed candidate for the United States Senate or a former congressperson, but from a sitting head of state of a major European nation. And meanwhile, while that's happening, people like Ben Sass, you remember him, Ben Sass, thank God, are gone. They're finished. They're not getting reelected. They have been replaced. Liz Cheney got rolled by 30 points. The Bush, Cheney, Clinton crime syndicate dynasty is over. There is not a Bush or a Clinton or Cheney, I don't believe, in any elected office anywhere. No, absolutely. You know, they would have continued running Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton and people like that in perpetuity forever. Right. All that's gone now, and that was unfathomable as recently as just 2015. So let's look at more polling data, though. One poll that was published after Biden's inauguration found that 87%, now these are their polls. This isn't like a poll of my radio audience, which is going to be like far right. This is system polls. 87% of Trump voters said that they are worried about anti-white discrimination. 80% of Trump voters reject the so-called white privilege theory. 64% of Trump voters believe that their race and ethnicity are important to their identity, and 40% believe that their race and ethnicity is extremely important to their sense of identity. And that's wonderful. That should be true for all people. And in fact, it is true for all people. It's not only allowed to be true, it is encouraged that you should be proud of whoever you are, whatever you are. And I agree with that, except for white people. If you are proud to be white, you are obviously a racist. If you're proud to be anything else, this is wonderful. Why wouldn't you be proud of the way God made you? But why is all this happening now? Our ideas are no more correct today than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 50 years ago, and they're no more right today than they will be 50 years or 100 years from now. So why now is all of this beginning to really catch fire? Why is this momentum building? Well, you know, a lot of it has to do with Trump, that a lot of this has been distilled and crystallized. But what has happened in the last, say, 5 years that has caused this nascent sense of truth to be accepted and the solidarity to occur? Well, I've got a list of the things that have happened in the last 5 years, just the last 5 years, that have caused all of these interesting polls that I've been citing. So, you know, again, you go back to the summer of St. George. 200 Confederate monuments were destroyed in this orgy of mob violence and actions of the far left and the left-wing governments. An all-out assault on all of America's heritage that ranged from not just people like Robert E. Lee, but to the founding fathers and even Christian missionaries. They were pulling down, if they even looked, they took down they desecrated a monument to Lincoln. It just didn't matter. Donald Trump and his supporters have been censored and purged from the internet by big tech, you know, going back to before Elon Musk bought Twitter. 6 months of non-stop Antifa and Black Lives Matter violence, from the death of George Floyd to the 2020 2020 election. Chaos, anarchy, murder, sacking of cities, the razing of police departments. The FBI and the DOJ under Biden turned a blind eye to all of this violence. They didn't go after any of those people. And they actually did. From 2020 onward, they got weaponized against something. They got weaponized against Trump and his supporters. You know, the J6 people. They launched a domestic war on terror against non-existent insurgents. And the media, as bad as they had always been, got exponentially worse. It exceeded all previous levels of bad to the point where you now have racial attacks on whites that have just become a never-ending bombardment in the media, leading up to, again, the 2024 election. Now everybody's just shell-shocked in the media. How did we lose that? The definition of racism, you know, I was writing about it some time ago in that book, has been changed to the point where, you know, conservatives now do understand it. I think that racist just simply means a white person. And racism is just something white people say that liberals disagree with. And the left believes that all white people are complicit in perpetuating systemic racism and white supremacy. The political, cultural, and corporate establishment have embraced equality, a concept that punishes whites on the basis of race. A lot of that's changing since Trump. I'm talking about the things that were in play the last 5 years that led to Trump's reelection. What I'm telling you now is why Trump won in November. Too many people to count were doxxed and fired and silenced for just having a difference of opinion. You know, the left says they love diversity. They love tolerance. They hate, and they have no tolerance for the diversity of opinion, I can assure you. Donald Trump told his followers that the 2020 election was outright stolen, and 70% agreed with him on that. And finally, there was this simultaneous push in the last few years, up until the last election, to indoctrinate children, little kids, in critical race theory and this transgender genital mutilation propaganda from kindergarten onward. Now, what sort of impact do you think all of those things had on the attitudes of decent people? Well, we saw in November, these people believed rightly that they were under attack, these Trump voters, and they came out. And what you saw was pretty remarkable. And I don't think the toothpaste is going to go back in the tube on these things. Having you know, developed this sense of awareness and the boldness to tell the truth has actually become in vogue now. You know, used to it would be a few of us doing it and we would get sniped and they would make examples out of us, and it would dampen the motivation of others to similarly speak out. But it has just reached a critical mass now, and it's just all over the place. I mean, does it even... So much so, does it even make sense to label us hate groups or extremists anymore? I mean, according to scientific research and analytical polling data, we're mainstream Republicans now. I mean, white nationalists, if you want to use that term, and I've never used that term myself, only because I think it sounds sort of militant, and because, of course, the media uses it interchangeably with white supremacists. But white nationalists now, if you want to use that term, are in fact polling better than journalists. They actually poll better than journalists with with Trump supporters out of the Republican Party. If you poll Republican voters, white nationalists are way up and journalists are way down. Now, for years, our collective has been toiling in the vineyard, but it's now beginning to bear fruit, as I said a moment ago. You know, those like Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan elected Donald Trump, by the way. That there would be no Donald Trump had there not been a Pat Buchanan. And I know that for an absolute fact. That's not just me sort of just reading into it. People forget this, but I was there. Donald Trump seriously wanted to be the Reform Party's nominee in 2000. People forget that. Look it up. There has been a lot of mainstream coverage about this, but not, I think, to the extent that there should have been. But you can find major articles, in all the system's leading press organs about, the fact that Donald Trump wanted to be the Reform Party's nominee for president in 2000. But he didn't have the organization, the Buchanan Brigades, and I was a part of this. We went in and we took over all of the state reform parties early, in the early winter of 2000, or early spring, late winter of 99, 2000, January, February, March, that time. Trump, in the summer of that year, began saying publicly he would like to be the nominee, and was sort of having this media campaign to win over the delegates. But the Buchanan folks weren't, we were going to go with that. But at the time, Trump was dismissing Pat Buchanan as a Nazi and as a racist. I mean, Donald Trump at that time in 2000 was saying all the things about Buchanan that people say about him now. Now, what happened? What happened between the year 2000 and the Donald Trump we knew and came to love in 2015? Was it entirely insincere? I don't think so. I don't think so. I do believe that people can change. If you don't believe that people can change their mind, then what are any of us doing any sort of outreach for? I think that Donald Trump, as he always had a knack to do in the real estate market, he saw an undervalued property in the message that Buchanan had of America First, trade policies, immigration restriction, a lot of these things that no other Republican was willing to touch, but there was a lot of enthusiasm for these issues, but nobody had harnessed that issue. Nobody wanted to. It was just laying there. I think Trump saw that energy that Buchanan had in 92 and in 96 and even in 2000, even though that, he didn't, get a good vote total. But there was an untapped energy there, and I think Trump recognized that. And when he came back in 2015, he ran on Pat Buchanan's platform.
That's right.
100%. He ran on Pat Buchanan's platform. But he did it with the charisma of a billionaire and with universal name recognition that everybody knew as the celebrity, and that was the difference. But it was those winning issues paired with Trump's personality. Not that Pat didn't have an incredible personality and sense of humor. He did. But he wasn't a household name in the way that Trump was, and he didn't have that kind of funding. So that's what happened. That's what happened. All this toiling in the vineyards, whether it was Pat Buchanan or people like us, as I said before, the first over the wall are going to get killed. That's what happens. But you give a chance for other people to step into your spot and move forward. And that's what's happening now. And sometimes you have to wait for the right conditions to present themselves and for the enemy to overplay their hand. Now you might be wondering, well, hang on a minute, James, what are you talking about this publicly for? Because if the enemy sees what you're saying today, and they're going to realize they've been making some mistakes, they're going to course correct. They're not going to do that. They can't do that. And do you know why they're not going to do that? Because they are so fevered in their absolute hatred of Christianity, of the people, the historic American majority, that there's no brakes on their train. They are so blinded by their hatred of all of the things that we know and love and care about that they will continue to accelerate until the inevitable occurs, whatever that may be. Now, here's some more poll numbers for you. 92% of Trump voters think that the mainstream media is identical to the Democratic Party. My only comment was, how is it only 92%? But 77% feel as though they've been gagged by political correctness, leading up to, all of these polls, by the way, leading up to Trump's election, not since January. 62% want to deport all illegal aliens. Buchanan was an outlier on this in his campaigns. Now it is the mainstream of the Republican Party. And again, when I refer to Trump voters, almost without exception, Jesse Lee Peterson and a few others notwithstanding, you know who we're talking about, white Americans, middle Americans. Attitudes are changing. When you see someone like Ron DeSantis, and I think he's right on a lot of issues, but when you see the governor of a state like Florida, what's it, like third biggest in electoral votes now, third, fourth, say at a press conference correctly that the Waukesha Christmas Parade massacre, I don't know if y'all remember this, there was a guy who drove his car into just a bunch of families basically at a Christmas parade in Waukesha, right up here in this region of the country. It was an anti-white attack. It was a black driver plowing through whites. And he said he did it just because he wanted to kill white people. I don't know why it was like it's a shocking thing to say that's an anti-white attack, but politicians weren't saying, they would never say that a few years ago. But Ron DeSantis said it in a press conference. And when you hear people like Ron DeSantis saying things like that, pat yourself on the back. You're the reason that occurred. These politicians are just trying to keep up with where their voters are now. And I've got a theory on human nature that's somewhere in between, I guess, pragmatism and cynicism. But I believe that there are very few people on either side of the political spectrum, the ideological divide, who have inflexible beliefs, who are true believers. Now, those of us in this room, I think, certainly would rise or fall with our beliefs come what may. We're not going to move. This is who we are. This is what we believe in. Whether it's fat years, lean years, gulag years, or whatever, we're not going to move from our position because it's right. But there is probably a group of avowed Marxists and communists who are not going to move off their positions and who want to see us destroyed at all costs. But the majority of the American people are somewhere in the middle, and they're just looking after number one. They're looking after themselves and their families, and they're going to do or say whatever they need to do or say to get by in life. And they'll take the path of least resistance. They'll conform to whatever the current trends and fashions of society are. It's not a good thing. I mean, you know, we mock the people who just are drunk on bread and circus. But it's not necessarily, hey, it's a true thing. You got to provide for a family. You can't take a disproportionate amount of risk with no reward and not be able to provide. I get that. But most people are going to conform to whatever the current trends and fashions of society are. But guess what's good about that? Is that they're going to do the exact same thing when we regain control of institutional power and when our hands are on the levers of power once again. So don't get me wrong. I would rather everyone be true believers, whatever that belief may be, especially our elected officials and our titans of industry. But as you're already seeing these social media companies and other major corporations trim their sails now that the winds are changing and have changed again with this re-election of Trump. And they're going to fall in line even more as we continue to build up to the point where we can exert more leverage than our opponents. It is just that simple. Change isn't always as far away as it may seem. And as I mentioned, politicians are already trying to keep up with the base on many of our issues. You're seeing it in their rhetoric, and not only that, in their legislation, and certainly with these executive orders. But so too are mainstream conservative influencers like Charlie Kirk and Matt Walsh. If you follow any of the things that they're saying now, I mean, they're basically giving like American Renaissance style commentaries now on these issues. They were kicking people out of their own venues when they were going these speaking tours. Now, Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA, Matt Walsh is another huge conservative influencer. 5-6 years ago, they were kicking people out of their speeches for even asking questions that would address the kind of things we're talking about today. To even ask the question was cause for ejection. Now, they are saying everything that I'm saying here today. If you read their commentaries now, it is identical with what we're talking about here today. That is a good thing. That is a good thing. Again, do they believe it? Are they doing it because it's politically expedient now? It's something that's where funding is now? I don't know. Have they had a true come to Jesus? Thank you, my friend. Have they really come to Jesus and had a true conviction on these issues? Would they go back to what they were if the tides turn again? Probably. Probably. But do I want to reject this assist and not accept what they're doing as something good? No, I can't do that. What they are doing and what they are saying is right. For whatever reason they're saying it, on a level doesn't matter. They're saying what's right. And they're saying it to millions of people. And this whole thing is beginning to turn. The whole culture is beginning to turn. Culture is like the Titanic. It doesn't turn quickly. And sometimes it doesn't turn quickly enough before you sink. But we're seeing it in fits and starts already. And, you know, when I first went on the air 21 years ago, it was a one-of-a-kind show. The ADL and the SPLC kept like a running diary of just about every show back then. But then something amazing happened. Right around the time Trump ran for the first time, there was just this explosion, this proliferation of talent. It just became ubiquitous. So many, it was like nobody was there in regular broadcast media, and then everybody was there in terms of live streams and podcasts, and there's just so many people talking about these issues now, and more coming online every day. We were talking about Kirk and Walsh and those people sort of late to the party, but it's been building and it still grows over the course of this last decade. And a lot of these people just have a lot of talent and certainly have the ability to articulate a message far better than I do. And they are doing these things now, and it's wonderful, wonderful to see. But some of the some other things that used to be taboo and only used to be discussed in gatherings like this, we've all watched enter into the conservative mainstream, certainly since my last appearance here at this forum in 2016. And Donald Trump has done so much to corrode the trust in these corrupt institutions of the deep state. He's really accelerated things decades in this regard. Decades worth of advancement in a few years on this regard, whether it be black on white crime, the great replacement, the term anti-white, white advocacy in general, things like opposing affirmative action and race-based hiring and opposition of critical race theory, exposing the SPL and the ADL, SPLC and the ADL. Hey, listen, a lot of people were scared to death of these organizations now. Now you try to solicit their condemnation because it helps you. It's true. Humpty Dumpty isn't going to be put back together again. And it's not just because Trump voters, the good people of this country, whoever and whatever they may be, are just beginning to have this development of this consciousness we've been talking about. The realities of diversity and multiculturalism have done the job for us. And they have made the decision for us. Whether we want it to be true or not, we're on a one-way track here. The United States is comprised of many squabbling nations. I mean, we've got a Tower of Babel so high here that the original one would pale in comparison. So, to make it simple, we partition it into halves, the red and the blue. But it's really a lot more than that. There are many different nations occupying this same geographical space, people who have nothing in common. They don't have the same heroes, they don't have the same language, the same religion, the same folkways, the same ancestors. You cannot, that is not a recipe for societal cohesion. And so, again, to keep it simple, we think of things in terms of red and blue, but we're really thinking about all of that. And so not only can these two sides not agree on, you know, a similar candidate, they can't agree on anything that makes a people. They can't even agree on what a man is or what a woman is anymore. And you can rest assured that the time is short for a society like that. It will not go on forever. It cannot go on forever. And we're all glad, and I am certainly glad, that Trump is in there right now and doing what he is doing. But Trump alone, he is only the president. And we don't know what's going to happen 4 years from now. I mean, it could go a couple of different ways. I mean, you could see the beginning of a shift that relegates the Democratic Party to a coastal party. That's one way it could go. It could go that way. Or it could go that other way. And in 4 years, we're right back to where we were 2 years ago. I don't know. But what I do know is America at large is never going to be one nation again. By the very definition of what constitutes a nation, a people. We are not one people. We cannot be one nation. And that is something that, that Trump cannot solve. As glad as I am that he is in there, that he will not be able to solve that. There's going to have to be something else that solves that. There's a considerable amount of stress being placed on the system right now. A lot of it, you know, again, was a result of those countless and many arrests and indictments of Donald Trump leading up to his election. I mean, this was a man, the front runner for the presidency, getting hauled into court up and down the eastern seaboard. That was unprecedented in American history. And I'm not just saying that nobody alive ever saw anything like that before. I mean, nobody in the history of this country ever saw it before. Not from Jamestown to Plymouth Rock all the way until 2024. Have you ever seen anything like that? The opposition party, or what was at the time the party in the White House, trying to put the president of Red State America into prison for multiple lifetimes. That's what they tried to do, and then they tried to kill him. But that whole chain of events last year, what that unleashed has really been something to behold. And it could be something that ultimately changes the course of American history for good. But to be clear and to reiterate, I mean, what we saw was the United States using its Justice Department to take out its chief rival in the election. You cannot exaggerate how radical that is. I mean, that is full-on third world stuff. And what was the response? What was the result of all that? Landslide win for Trump. Landslide win for Trump. A vote for Trump in November of last year was a vote to bring this to a climax. Because after January 6th, the Democrats were never going to accept the legitimacy of a Trump presidency. And now, I still don't know what they're doing. I mean, the Democrats, they are so shell-shocked, I still don't even know what they're doing. And I mean, they're essentially, that one guy, Al Green, who went up and interrupted the President's State of the Union address, I had to look up, I thought it was the singer at first, but it wasn't. He was a Democratic congressman. But they're like censuring him now. I mean, they're just really splitting in complete and utter disarray, which is where you want your enemy. But they were never going to accept a Trump presidency, and they went all out to stop it. The deep state, all of that. And Trump's still got a lot of problems in the government. I mean, his appointments have been great. You got a lot of problems with the courts. A lot of problems with the courts. I think by my last count, I think it's up to like 58 excellent, common sense, rule of law type executive orders that Trump has decreed have just been completely overridden, overruled by a judge you've never heard of in a town you've never heard of. I mean, what is that? You're going to have to do something about the courts. But nobody's going to take the off-ramp. All of this polarization and animosity that has been building up for decades and decades and decades is boiling over. I mean, there's a little bit of sort of an impasse right now because, again, the left is in such disarray, but they'll be back. And nothing has been ameliorated in terms of, well, we're all Americans now. No. We're never going to be all Americans ever again because events are moving at a faster pace than ever before, and we're feeling the pull of the waterfall. You can feel it. Something is coming, and Trump's election was not it. Trump's election was a great thing, and a lot of good things are happening right now, but it has not solved the fundamental issue that is causing all of this discontent in America, which is multiculturalism, people who have nothing in common, living and working together. It is not our greatest strength, it is our greatest weakness, and there's not even another one that's close. So let's recap. You had the leading Republican presidential candidate, now the president, who was indicted hither and yon. Biggest land war since World War II is still going on in Europe. That can still spiral out of control at any moment, although I'm glad Trump is the one talking to these folks instead of Kamala. The normies have been radicalized in the best sense of the word over the past several years, and most people in the country now expect there to be an event in their lifetime because this polarization is off the charts. Whether that event is another civil war or a nuclear war, an economic collapse, I don't know. But more on that in just a second before we close. Another reason why things are changing, the greatest generation, the silent generation, so-called, they're in the graveyards now. The post-World War II order is destabilizing. Thank God. The entire system is losing its legitimacy in the eyes of millions of people. As we said a moment ago, young people now are further to the right than the other generations. Revolutionary changes like this can occur very gradually and then all at once. Public trust in institutions has vanished amongst the Trump side, which is exactly half the country. They've lost total faith in the courts, in the media, in federal law enforcement, in elections themselves. I mean, right now, that has been tempered because Trump is in office, but we'll see. That is not going to go away if he goes away or when he goes away. If it's not somebody like Vance or somebody that could be trusted to continue this, you're going to go right back to where you were before. And a deep distrust like that in the federal government has to take place before any real change can occur, and we are there. We are absolutely there and have been there now for a few years. And that distrust is going to be right there again if the next election doesn't go away. An election, you're not going to vote yourself out of this, by the way. There's no voting ourselves out of what America has become. You can't do it. I mean, you can have disagreements on candidates if you are a homogenous people. When you're not a homogenous people, you cannot vote yourself out of this. One side will dominate the other at all times, and there will be no concessions. I mean, truly, one side has to wipe the other off the board.
There you go.
That's the only way that there's ever going to be a society here on this continent again that would truly be great. That's the only way you're going to make America great again. You guys get rid of a lot of people. And I'm not talking about anything violent. Don't get me wrong. I am talking, though, about you're probably going to have some sort of a secession or balkanization at some point in the future. Well, I can't read my writing there. But anyway, I know what I was going to say. I know what I was going to say. The Trump administration ought to give John Mangopoulos a lot of credit because I firmly believe that it was the TV show John and I did in October of 16. We did this TV show after I spoke here in 16, and Trump won Michigan by what, like 10,000 votes?
That's right.
Yeah, so right there, that was the man who did it. I'm going to continue to tell myself that, whether it's true or not. That's the guy. We put Trump over the top in Michigan. We got some great people in Michigan, by the way. I've mentioned Kyle Bristow, my attorney, in that incredible lawsuit. By the way, that actually rewrote defamation law in the state of Michigan. Did you know that? It used to be, and there is an addendum now to defamation law or libel law in Michigan that cites that court case. But if you don't know Kyle, I wanted to show him. I was hoping he would come today, but he couldn't make it. He is a watchmaker, and I got a nice watch. Certainly the nicest watch I've ever. You got one too, John? Nicest watch I've ever had on my wrist was made by Kyle. It was a gift as a result of that lawsuit. But I also want to mention Linda is in the crowd today. Linda is a courtroom, well, I won't say what she is. She transcribes things. She is a typist. And she has taken, there's been some interest in some of my historical interviews. I mean, we're really good about interviewing the family of super famous people. I've interviewed Mel Gibson's father and George Wallace's son. And anyway, some of these interviews that have gotten some interest that have been many years old, she has brought them back to life. And they have been picked up by newspapers and magazines and a lot of online webzines, and they have been read now by tens of thousands of people who, probably didn't hear them in 2008 or 2012 or whenever some of these interviews take place. So I want to thank you, Linda, while we're talking about Michigan. And I tell you what, you're not going to make America great again until you make Christianity great again. And we've got a great hero of our people, Pastor Brett McAtee, right up here in Michigan. And he is a brother. He was on my show just last week to deliver the Resurrection Day message on our show a week ago tonight. And he's in the room today, and I'm honored.
Are all these interviews archived on your website?
We got everything archived going back to 2000. We went on the air in 2004. The archives got rolling in 2005. So yes, all these interviews with everybody and then some. A lot of people, a lot of interviews. But nevertheless, we have received this gift, this inadvertent gift that Trump has given us. But to be clear, this is an inevitability that still something more has to happen. The law has been entirely weaponized in the blue states. You can get justice means something very different in rural red state areas than it does in Manhattan or Atlanta or Washington, D.C. Two very different definitions of justice. It's like the definition of egregious. Look up the definition of egregious. It has two definitions to the word egregious. One is good, and the second definition is bad. That's the truth. The word egregious means good or bad. So that's the definition of justice. It's that stark in between the red and blue state courts. And you look at what they did with the J6 people. You look what they did to the president. You look what they did to, Charlottesville. Those people, 6 years, now 7 years later, well, now not anymore, but 6 years ago, up until the Trump Justice Department came in, they were still going after these people with hardcore felonies for carrying a tiki torch in defense of the monument of an American hero, one of the greatest Americans who ever lived, General Robert E. Lee. They were putting him in jail for 6 years for that. Exercising their First Amendment rights. Now, meanwhile, at the same event on the same day in Charlottesville, there was a guy with Antifa. These were terrorists, true, straight up terrorists. He had an improvised flamethrower that he was spraying at people, and he never got bothered at all. So that's what the law is now, and that is why Trump alone isn't going to. Another reason why Trump alone isn't going to be able to fix it. The only thing that matters when you go into court in blue states, and my trivial example here in Michigan was one example. There's been much more serious that led to a lot of jail time. The only thing that matters when you go to court is whose side are you on? Whose side are you on? You can't live in a country like that. And all of this demonstrates that Trump and his supporters simply, cannot get a fair trial. And at this late stage of decline, a complete reform of the system, making America from sea to shining sea, is, I think, utterly out of the question. And that is, again, we talked about making America great again. I don't think you can do it. Not in the way that people think, where you're just one country, one people again. The legitimacy of the system must evaporate before that can occur, though, of course, but thankfully we're well on our way. We're talking about the stress level being raised, and once the stress level raises to a certain point, it has to have a vent. It has to be vented. And Trump was a vent for half the country, but not the other half. And that's going to continue to boil and simmer. And this country is still dysgenic in many ways and degenerate in every way. And blue state America is trying to do all of these things. Conservative states, legislatures, would routinely pass laws only to have them overturned by rogue judges in other parts of the country. The president is seeing that happen now. But if these things can further widen the divide, which I think is important, we should welcome that, because that gives us the opportunity to consider alternative solutions. The balkanization of America may not be a pleasant prospect, but it has happened to many different nations. Every nation that we used to call home in Europe or wherever has not looked like it does on the current map throughout its history. America is very unique in that regard, where we just kept expanding and we never withdrew. That has happened to other nations throughout the course of history. Why should we be an exception? So let's keep that option in mind as we continue to watch what happens with Trump over these next 3 years. But we are a divided nation, and again, it could go where the Democrats begin to fade into a regional party, or they come back strong and we're back into subjugation. So under this present arrangement, we have to understand that our people don't have a future with those people. We cannot live with them. And why would we want to? But if we continue down this track, it's not going to go well, because they're bringing us down. They're bringing us down. And so you can call it a national divorce or secession or whatever. But if that is our future, or if at least it's an option that our future may take, then we might as well begin to seriously consider it, as I have. And have the opportunity to write, as John mentioned a moment ago, in his all-time best introduction, the opening chapter of this book, The Honorable Cause of Free South. So this was a book that came out just in the spring of last year, where it examines the concept of a national divorce through the lens of Southern identity, but its ideas that I and my 11 co-authors put into this book are applicable to all people, and it's certainly applicable to all Americans. And it debuted on April 1st of last year at number 11 in the nationalism category and number 19 in political science, and it held its ground in the top 20 for 3 months. So it was well received. And I know he's got copies of both of those back there. It's a serious book, though, that raises a serious question. But why did this book find an audience in modern time? Well, I'll tell you. Rasmussen poll found that 47% of Republican voters support a national divorce. Now, that was before Trump. But, if Trump is gone, those feelings are going to come right back up. 47%, that's nearly half of Republicans think that they would be better off if their state seceded from the federal government. That is astounding. Never has it been anywhere near that high since the last time we tried that. More and more Republicans are now supporting these ideas. And, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, these extremist ideas are becoming more mainstream, so-called extremist ideas. The country is more polarized now than at any point between the war between the states. We have irreconcilable differences, to put it mildly. Millions of people are open to secession now, and the public is beginning to accept this. Secession movements, by the way, that's not just a Southern thing. They're sprouting up all over the country leading up to Trump's reelection. You may have heard that parts of Oregon, these conservative counties in Oregon that just get sunk by Portland, have been wanting to secede and join Idaho. And that's actually been met with the support of the voting public and with actual elected officials there on a county level that are trying to get that done. Whether it'll happen or not, but that's what the people want. Just a couple of years ago in Texas, 2 years ago, Salon magazine wrote, Texas Republicans got a taste of just how far right their party has become. At the state GOP convention, isn't anonymous people responding to a poll. These are the delegates of the Texas Republican Party. They put into their official platform 2 years ago that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president, and they proposed repealing the 1965 Voting Rights Act. That's not the Republican Party of Massachusetts that is like the Washington Generals or the Harlem Globetrotters. That's one of the biggest and most influential Republican parties in the country, and that's where they are. Rolling Stone magazine, they actually attacked me just about a year ago, I think, reported that Texas State Representative Brian Slayton had introduced a bill that would place a referendum for Texas secession on the 2024 ballot. That didn't happen. He ended up getting removed from office, but not because of that. But it was House Bill 3596, and it would have allowed Texans to vote on, quote, whether or not the state should investigate the possibility of Texas independence and present plans to the legislature. That came from a sitting member of the Republican state legislature in Texas. When interviewed about it, this representative wrote, after decades of continuous abuse on our rights and liberties by the federal government, it is time for the people of Texas to make their voices heard. Now, do I think that that's going to happen right now? No, I do not, but there is a pulse to something like that, and it's not just in the South. Did you know, and I can guarantee you haven't heard about this. I don't know, y'all are pretty smart, so maybe you have. Most people haven't. There was a question of secession that already reached the floor of the New Hampshire State House. The Portland Press Herald headline reads, New Hampshire House votes on seceding from the United States. That actually reached the floor and they voted on it. Now, you really would have heard about it if the vote passed. It didn't pass. But the proposal called for independence from the United States and all references to the United States in the New Hampshire State Constitution, statutes, and regulations to be nullified. 13 members of the New Hampshire State House of Representatives voted in favor of doing that. And in doing so himself, Representative Matthew Santosasso argued that it is just a matter of time before this union collapses. National divorce is going to happen. It's inevitable. We have an opportunity to get ahead of it, he said. Again, Trump's election alone hasn't changed what I believe to be reality about these issues. 20%, they ran a poll of New Hampshire voters after that happened. 20%, 1 out of 5, said they wanted New Hampshire to secede from the Union. That's a lot. It only takes 10%. I think, what, 10% were involved in the American Revolution? So Trump has been a Tylenol to a lot of the things that have plagued